Now that you know all the basics behind monohybrid and dihybrid crosses, now I'm going to throw a wrench in the chain. If we were in class, I would ask you right now, is life perfect? Is life all clearly black and white? You'd probably tell me no. So now that you understand the basics, now I get to start messing with you a little bit. And this lecture will center around all of the exceptions to the rules. These are all the exceptions to go against what I've already taught you in some ways. When you're dealing with genetics, it's not all black and white. Some things are, but a lot of things, there's a lot of gray area. And so all of these different types of crosses that I'm going to talk about over this lecture are all the exceptions to the rules. Just to give you a little bit of background, most genes do not show the simple inheritance patterns of dominance and recessive. I've talked a lot about traits that are purely black and white. The hitchhiker's thumb is a good one. If you can bend your thumb back, it's called a hitchhiker's thumb, and that is a dominant trait. If you cannot, that is the recessive trait, if your thumb sticks straight up and down. If you have a widow's peak, that's a purely dominant recessive trait that you can show. Whether you have attached earlobes or not is a purely dominant recessive trait. But when you're talking about a lot of the other traits that you exhibit, they're not all that clear-cut and simple. There is a lot of gray area. So most of our genes that make you and make me who we are not all clear-cut, dominant, and recessive, and that's the end of the story. A lot of them have a lot of wiggle room in that. So the majority of our genes have more than 2 alleles. And just to continue on with that, most of our traits are controlled by multiple alleles or genes. 2 big examples that I can use to talk about that. One of them is eye color. Now, typically, brown eyes are considered to be the dominant phenotype. Blue eyes are typically considered to be the recessive phenotype. But when you're talking about eye color, you have to remember there's other eye colors out there. You could be green-eyed, you could be hazel-eyed, you could be brown, you could be blue, or you can be a combination of many different types of colors. Our eye color is not controlled by just one gene, by just one allele. It's controlled by many, and that's why we have so many different types of eye color. With eye color, yes, brown is typically considered to be dominant, blue is typically considered to be recessive, but you have a lot of other things that are in play that will influence your eye color as well. The other one that I can talk about is height. There are really tall people and there are really short people. Within my family, my mom is about an inch taller than I am. I'm 5'3", she's 5'4". My brother and my dad are about the same height, 5'8", 5'9". We're about average. I consider to be a little bit shorter, but whatever. We're average. Within my mom's family, though, there is a little bit of a difference in height. I have a cousin, Lewis Oliver, who is over 6 feet tall. But if you looked at the rest of his family, they're all average height. His tallness had to have come from somewhere within my mom's family history, within the genetics that makes up my mom's side of the family and which also makes up me. It's just I wasn't lucky enough to get all the right pieces to be taller than what I am. So our height, the reason you see such variation within family, which when you see such variation within the public in general, it's all because of the fact that height is controlled by several different alleles and several different genes, and that's what gives us that variation. So with the exceptions, I'm going to talk about several different ones. Something that influences and makes it all gray instead of nicely black and white. The first exception that I'm going to talk about is something called incomplete dominance. From this one, you can already figure out what's going on just by looking at the name. Everything that I've taught you before, there is a dominant gene and there is a recessive gene. If you get the dominant gene, you have the dominant trait, whatever that is. But in these, you have alleles that can't trump each other. They're almost on equal footing. So what happens in incomplete dominance is when one allele is not dominant over another allele. For example, 4 o'clocks. These are a very popular flower in the South. Within these flowers, you have 2 major flower colors. You can either be red or you can be white. However, if I were to cross these 2 together and make up a new generation, what you would actually get within that generation are all pink flowers. You have incomplete dominance going on here. The red gene, the red allele, does not trump the white allele. So when you have a heterozygote offspring come out of one of these crosses, you get a blending of their 2 phenotypes, and I end up with pink flowers. When you get into class, we will talk about this a little bit more, and I will work through a cross with you. But one other thing that I want you to have written down within your notes is the heterozygote, and I just mentioned it, phenotype, is somewhere between the 2 homozygous phenotypes. Red, white makes pink. Another exception to the rule is called codominance. And yes, these 2 are very different. They sound very similar, but the patterns that you get out at the end makes them very different. With codominance, what happens is when both alleles contribute to the phenotype. In this one, I could do an example with cow hair. I grew up in the South. There's a lot of cows. One phenotype that you could have is a cow with red hair. Another one that you could have is a cow with white hair. If cross these 2, you know I don't get a cow that is pink. So this is where you kind of different. When you cross a red cow with a white cow, what you actually end up with is something called a roan cow. This is when you get a cow that has a mix of red and white hair. It's not a blending, not where you're going to take red and white and you're going to make pink flowers like it was with incomplete dominance. You will actually have a cow that has red and white hair mixed together, and it's called a roan cow. So they are codominant. Just like in incomplete dominance, they don't cross each other out. They don't dominate each other, but they will actually blend together and make something unique for that heterozygous offspring. Another type of exception is actually something called multiple alleles. This is when genes have more than 2 alleles possible. You're only still going to have just 2 alleles within your body, but there are actually more than 2 alleles possible throughout the population of people, of individuals, of organisms, whatever it is you're talking about. The best example for this one is blood, and it's what we call ABO blood group. Within blood, you have several different options of blood that you could possibly have. One of them, you could just have A-type blood. You could also just be B-type blood. Or you could be a blending of A and B blood. Or you can be O blood. It's all the different blood types that are possible. If you are A blood, you'll have 2 different genotypes. You could be homozygous A, or you could be heterozygous AO. Same thing for B. You could be homozygous B or heterozygous BO. For AB, you only got one option. You're AB. And then for O, you only have one option. You are going to be OO. Out of these, this one is actually the recessive phenotype. If you are O blood, The only thing you can be, obviously, after you compare all the different genotypes that we looked at, you can only be OO. So out of this relationship, you do have a dominant recessive relationship going on where A and B both trump O. However, you also have a codominance relationship going on here with AB because A and B don't trump each other. So you've got several different things going on with the ABO blood type. When you get into class, I will go into much more detail with this one, and we'll do some crosses with it to show you how it works. And then I will also show you a different version that we can also do as well. Another exception to the rule are things we call polygenic traits. And I've kind of already briefly touched on this, so after I give it the definition, you can probably tell me what my examples are going to be. But polygenic traits, if you just decipher the name, many genes, traits. This is when traits are controlled by 2 or more genes. When you're talking about polygenic traits, you have a wide range of possible phenotypes. So going back to the very beginning of my lecture, you could probably already tell me 2 different traits, 2 different phenotypes that would factor into this. So examples of this are definitely that eye color. You could have height. Another thing you could also look at would be skin color. And if you come take anatomy, I will actually tell you where our skin color actually comes from. But these are traits that are controlled by more than one gene, and so that's why we have such a wide variance within the population. The last exception that I'm going to talk about is called multifactorial inheritance. Multifactors is basically what this boils down to. This is when the environment, along with your genes, influence the expression of traits. Examples of this. Freckles are a trait that you can inherit through your genetics. However, freckles can also be caused by the environment. Freckles, as some of you know, and as my brother knows very well, freckles caused by sun exposure. So you can get freckles through your genetic background, and basically if you're a redhead, you're going to have freckles. Or you can actually get freckles due to the amount of sun that you're exposed to over your lifetime. My brother used to work on a farm in high school, and at the time he wasn't big about wearing sunscreen. I still don't think he is, which I keep trying to get him to, but he doesn't listen to his little sister. But he used to get major sunburns on his back at the very beginning of every planting season. And now his back is covered in freckles because of the amount of sunburns that he's had. Another one that can also be affected by your environment is height. Height can be influenced by what you eat or what you don't eat. If you look at different populations across the world, if you asked anybody who's probably the shortest race, it's probably going to be the Asians. And there are many different factors of why they are short. Some of it is going to be their genetics. However, some of it is the food that they eat. So when mom told you to eat all your vegetables, she wasn't kidding. It does help when it comes to your height. So what you eat or what you don't eat can also influence your height. I'm a big believer that height is more determined by your genetics, and that's why I'm so short, but maybe it's because I didn't eat my carrots. Another example that I really like and that we might talk about again when we get into ecology is fur color of some mammals can be influenced by where they live. Example of this would be Himalayan rabbits. With these rabbits during the summer, they can be multiple different colors depending on what their genes actually are. But in the winter, they largely turn white so that living up in the mountains, they can blend in with their surroundings. A lot of animals do this. They will change colors depending on this time of year, the season, whatever it is, so that they can blend in and hide from their predators. A lot of foxes do this. Foxes that live up in the Arctic Circle, they will be one color during the spring when they come down in order to feed, but when it starts to snow, they will actually start to turn white so that they can blend in with their surroundings and sneak up on prey or hide from prey, whichever the case may be. So these are all the exceptions that I'm going to introduce to you, and that kind of blows everything out of the water that I already taught you. Bottom line with all of these is, with the exceptions, we'll go into how they work. We'll do examples with each one when you get into class, and you'll have practice problems just like you have in the past with any other hybrid cross, with any other topic that we've talked about. But just keep in mind, life isn't perfect. So there is a lot of gray and fuzzy areas. So a lot of the things that make you are who you are influenced by your environment, by other genes, and just by the way you live your life. Okay? So I will see you. I will stop the lecture here, and I will see you in class.